Today in the news of Vanguard Live, I am Precious Chukudi. Begin with the front pages of the papers this morning, starting off with Vanguard. Vanguard is leading with presidential poll, presidency, APC attack Obi over stance on Supreme Court verdict. The writer says Nigeria's democracy victim of apex court judgment, according to Obi, laments a court ignored evidence of forgery. Regain insists this is just the beginning of struggle. State opposition to bad policies starts now. Find better jobs, stop attacking judiciary, Presidency tells Obi. Adds no court gives judgment based on public opinion. APC faults Obi's haughty sense of entitlement. And of course, a photo story showing Obi speak on Supreme Court verdict. And NMPCL working with NATI, others to reconcile 2021 report. You can see that on page 8. Suspended Adamawa Rec Hudu on the run, and that's coming from INEC. On page 9, Judge restates order for unconditional release of ex-CBN Governor Emefiele. On page 13, Matawale didn't patronize bandits. That's coming from Media Aid. Nollywood actor Mr. Ibu's leg amputated. On page 8, bandits Boko Haram killed 29 in Katsina, Borno. And of course, lastly on the front page of Vanguard newspaper, we have pension funds raise a stake in federal government securities by 23% to 11.3 trillion naira. All right, let's take a look at the Nation newspaper. The Nation is leading with federal government shun terror Latvia. You can see that on page 5. Stories above. We have a presidency tackles Obi over attack on Supreme Court. Ex-Anambra governor should find another vocation. Heavy rainfall coming in Lagos, Ogun, Rivers, 12 others. NNPCL explains the FARC claim. NATI's 2021 report. All right, let's take a look at the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian is leading with less than 30% of registered voters will decide by Imo Kogi polls. You can see that on page 6. And of course, there's an infographic showing more on that report. Federal government to kickstart housing slum development schemes with 100 billion naira. Drawbacks of dollarization of the Nigeria economy. It's an editorial. You can read that on page 12. Court confirms authenticity of Enugu's governor's NYC certificate. Nigeria needs a $7.6 billion to restore oil production to 2.1 mbpd by 2025. You can read that on the business page. Terrorists attack Maulud procession in Katsina, kill 30, injure, kidnap others. Obi hints at recontesting in 2027, canvasses rotational 5-year single term for president. And U.S. government travel advisory, hurtful to Nigeria's economy, says federal government. And let's take a look at the Punch newspaper. The Punch is leading with off-season poll. Military police vow tough action for ballot box snatchers. Others. The writer says the security chiefs warn hoodlums 67,000 policemen for Kogi Bayelsa governorship elections. IG orders tight security at collation centers. Federal government vow transparency. Saraki demands of fairness. And of course, you can see a photo story showing more on the deployment of policemen for Kogi Bayelsa. Soldiers ensure force patrol Kogi Bayelsa flashpoints. Court rejects Akeredolu lawmakers' suit against Aida Tiwa. You can see that on page 9. Lagos slashes BRT fares by 25% after passengers outcry. 2 die in Canadian embassy fire. Tinubu mourns. Stories above. 4.3 trillion naira lost to oil theft in 5 years. That's coming from government. And lastly, on the front page of the Punch newspaper, INEC delays the trial of 197 electoral offenders. You can read that on page 8. And that's how we can take on the front pages of the papers. Join us after the break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. If you're just joining, still today in the news on Vanguard Live, I am Precious Chukudi. Joining to talk about some of the stories on the front pages of the papers this morning is Mr. Dayo Akintobi, a publisher of Likoji Today, Kejo Today, and Lekki Today. It's good to have you join us this morning.
Always a pleasure to be here. Good
And it's
morning.
good to speak to you physically because, I mean, it's been a long time. We've been doing Zoom all the
Yes.
while.
For about 3 months I've been out of the country and we've been doing remote.
True.
So it's good to be back in the studio.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
All right, so let's delve in this morning, and we're talking about Peter Obi disagreeing on the Supreme Court's ruling, which affirmed the president as the winner of the presidential election. And he went ahead to say that the court ignored evidence of identity theft and rigging against the president, and that opposition to bad policies has started. What's your take?
Well, I think, as we all know, the Supreme Court is the final bus stop in any legal proceeding. And once the Supreme Court has made its pronouncement, that is final. So I noticed that both Atiku and Peter Obi seem to have made public statements that disagree with the ruling of the court. They're fully entitled to disagree. Any of us can have an opinion, but that doesn't have any force in law. It doesn't change the final ruling of the court. And as a result, I think that it's pretty much sour grapes. I don't think that they should have publicly been basically calling out an institution like the Supreme Court, even if you disagree. Look, the law is what the Supreme Court says the law is. Whether you agree with it or not, it is sacrosanct. And so complaining doesn't make any difference. Disagreeing doesn't make any difference. And what it does do is risk undermining the sanctity of an institution like the Supreme Court. Because if people begin to question or doubt the sanctity of the ruling of the court, then people begin to lose confidence in the judiciary. So I think our elder statesmen should be magnanimous in loss. I mean, in losing, they should not throw out the baby with the bathwater in terms of the fact that they now start casting aspersions on that holier than holy institution as the Supreme Court. We don't have to agree with the outcomes, the rulings. We don't have to agree. We can have our personal opinions, but they are the final arbiters of the law. And the law is what the Supreme Court law says is the law. So once they've made their ruling, I think we should accept it for what it's worth. The part that encouraged me, what Peter Obi said, was that he will now spend his time creating a credible opposition. I think that's very important. If you look at a country like the UK, where I've been for the last 3 months, they have something called a shadow government. That is the opposition. For every substantive post in the sitting administration, the opposition has a counterpart who is a shadow minister or a shadow prime minister who is constantly calling to question all the policies of the administration. I think part of why our governance, our state of governance is where it is today is because we've had very weak people calling government to question. We've had a weak opposition party, weak media, weak civil society organization, such that government just feels it can run roughshod over the will of the people. Look at when PDP was in power for 16 years. It had little or no opposition. Now, Nigeria is becoming a one-party state with APC again, has little or no opposition. See, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is a maxim that we're all familiar with. And so if as an administration, you don't have anybody putting the fire to your feet, you don't have anybody calling you to question or calling you to accountability, then you become imperial and you begin to do as you please and run roughshod over the rights and sentiments and will of the people. So he says he wants to devote his time to being an opposition. Atiku said the same thing. So hopefully between the two of them, they can build, whether together or separately, a credible opposition that will make government accountable to the people, that will take government to task on everything it does that they think is wrong, and tell the people how they would have done it differently. So that was an encouraging part of his speech. But like I said, I wasn't happy about the fact that they criticized the Supreme Court's ruling. I don't think that is correct.
All right. In what areas do you expect the other parties to, play the opposition to the current government?
Well, there's so many things the opposition stands there to do. Peter Obi, for example, said he wants to be at the vanguard of a new movement, a new way of doing things, a new way of governance. And by that, I think what he means is a government that's coming to serve the people and not the other way around. Typically, Nigerian politicians have generally always been very self-serving, been very narrow-minded in their interests, and a new way. The first new way, of course, would be to have selflessness in politics, whereby our leaders are going there to be servants of the people. So that's one of the ways that opposition can begin to highlight the deficiencies of the way we currently do things. Nobody has a monopoly on wisdom. So it's not as if to say if the administration does something that you don't agree with, it doesn't necessarily mean that your idea is a better one. But it's important for us to interrogate different ideas. So if the administration puts forward this idea of, okay, let us begin to remove subsidy before we put in cushioning measures. Maybe the opposition can come out and shout and say, no, you should put in cushioning measures in place before you remove the subsidy. And then we can have a public debate. So it is the role of the opposition to highlight and spotlight opposing viewpoints in a way that generate debate so that the best ideas, you know how they say competition breeds excellence. We can have competition in ideas as well. So if government proposes one solution, the opposition can come up with a counter solution. We can now evaluate the two ideas and have a public debate about it, as opposed to government comes and says one thing and that thing goes because there's nobody bringing a contrary opinion. That's the role of an opposition, and that's what I hope will begin to emerge to deepen our democracy.
All right. He also spoke about the judgment being a total breach of the confidence the Nigerian people have in the judiciary. What are your thoughts? I mean, we've had conversations on this, Nigerian people not trusting the judiciary and all of that.
Well, you see, here's the thing. He said that the judgment was a technical judgment, that it was technicalities that were used to affirm the election of the president. Things like, oh, you can't bring in a new evidence at the Supreme Court. Oh, this issue is statute barred or is time barred. Oh, we can't look into issues of pre-election matters. There are matters like things about, did he resign from one party before he got to another party? Was his certificate forged? Was it not forged? Did he, all those kind of pre-election matters and things like that. They're all technicalities that the law says this is the procedure by which this is. So what Obi was complaining about was that the ruling ignored the evidence and focused on technicalities. And I think he wanted to fault the Supreme Court for that. But I go back to saying that the law is what the Supreme Court says is the law. Look, there is no body of laws or constitution in the world that can capture every element of human behavior. It's not possible. Some things happen that have never happened before, that the framers of the Constitution didn't anticipate. Look, for example, the issue of when President Yaradua was sick and he didn't hand over to President Goodluck Jonathan and he was about to pass away, and the House of Assembly looked in the Constitution. The Constitution has no precedence for this. What do we do? So eventually they had to invoke a certain doctrine, I think doctrine of necessity or something like that, to use to impose and give Goodluck Jonathan power of the presidency, even though Yaradua was still alive. So what I'm saying is, Constitution can't anticipate when you are writing it. It can't anticipate every single problem you have. It can't see it. So it's up to the Supreme Court to interpret what the Constitution does not say, from the spirit of what it says, from the letter of what it says. You interpret the spirit. That, okay, they said 1 + 1 = 2. So from the 1 + 1 = 2, what will then 2 + 2 = 2? They make inferences based on what is not said. So for you to now say that the Supreme Court is not competent, their ruling was faulty, nobody can allege that, because the Supreme Court is so all-powerful that it makes its own law essentially within the Constitution, because there are things the Constitution does not say, right, that the Supreme Court has to determine on its own. So what it determines is what the law is. So you cannot call to question what the Supreme Court has ruled. If you don't like it, unfortunately, there's no higher authority to appeal to except maybe God. And God does not administer the affairs of man in a courtroom in this country, in any country in the world. So I would say that once the Supreme Court has made a proclamation, it is final and we should accept it in good faith, even if we don't agree with it. The way to object to Supreme Court ruling is when 4 years time comes and you are going to the polls, elect a person who thinks the way you think and will appoint judges who think the way you think. Once the judges are in there, whatever they do is sacrosanct. It's the law. So the only way to change that, and you know, Supreme Court appointments are for life unless they retire. I think, well, maybe they have a certain age they retire. I can't remember about how it runs in this country. But I know in America it's for life. Until they die, they don't, unless they voluntarily retire. So the only way to change a Supreme Court ruling is to make sure that the president who appoints those Supreme Court justices, of course, they're subject to Senate approval. I think the NJC also has a role to play and all that. But the president is the primary one who nominates, I think, justices. And if that's the case, then elect a president who has your own same ideology, who has your own same ideals, who upholds the same values that you uphold, because you know that will reflect in his appointments to the court. And then you will get the kind of people on the bench who make the kind of rulings that you will agree with. But for now, whoever is there, whatever they decide, we have to live with. Peter Obi has to live with it. Atiku has to live with it. And it doesn't help our matters at all for them to publicly and openly chastise the court as saying the court is wrong or the court was incompetent or the court didn't rule properly. First of all, neither of the two of them are lawyers anyway. They don't know the law. And even if they are lawyers, they are not elevated to the extent of a Supreme Court judge who has the ultimate authority to interpret the Constitution as he sees fit.
All right, what do you think about Peter Obi canvassing for rotational 5-year single term for president?
Interesting. Atiku had something similar. He says 6 years single term. And, there are some countries that do it. By and large, I think the majority of democracies have 2 terms, maybe 4 years, some 5 years, as opposed to 1 term. But I can understand where they are coming from in terms of wanting reform, democratic reform, and thinking that, okay, maybe 1 term. Because remember, first of all, in the second term of every president, they more or less now pursue their own agenda because they have nothing to lose in terms of being re-elected. So they make themselves less accountable. They're a bit more freewheeling, exercise a lot more liberty in the decisions they make. So perhaps 1 term might reduce the tension and the stress of going for re-election. But I wouldn't stop there. I would look for electoral reform in so many ways. Why stop at having a 1-term president for 6 years or for 5 years? Why not just overhaul the whole system and say, get rid of the presidency, go back to parliamentary, which Nigeria was from independence, because this presidential system is too expensive, having bicameral legislature, having so many ministers, having full-time legislatures. The cost of governance is absolutely crippling this country. So why don't we, instead of just 1 term, 5 years for the president, why don't we just overhaul the entire political system? Let's go back to a parliamentary system where we have part-time legislatures. They collect sitting allowances, not salaries. So we won't have this issue of 160 million naira SUV jeeps for 369 House of Reps and 109, if you know how many billion naira that is at a time when the country can ill afford it. We won't have those kind of issues because legislators will be part-timers. They will have their own regular day job. They will run their own expenses. They just get sitting allowances. That will shrink the size and cost of government. That will have more disposable income for social services. So I think it didn't go far enough. I don't think it's far enough to say 1 term for the president for 5 years. I think he should have advocated an overhaul of the entire political structure.
All right, moving on now. The federal government has condemned the recent travel advisory by the United States of America to its citizens in Nigeria, saying such advisory can cause needless panic and also have adverse economic impact. What's your take?
Well, can you blame America? Look at just yesterday, they beheaded 13 people in one of the northern states. Boko Haram beheaded people. In Katsina yesterday or the day before, they killed people. So we still have an insecurity problem. Now, that advisory was to its own citizens, saying that, look, from all indications and from everything in the public space, Nigeria is still an unsafe place. And it is our duty as an administration to advise our citizens and say, If you're going there, be careful. That's a responsible government as far as I'm concerned. Are we going to lie and say that Nigeria is safe? If we want to be honest with ourselves, are we going to say there's no insecurity in Nigeria? I just gave you the example of the killings that happened yesterday and the day before. Why would a country want its citizens, its innocent citizens, caught in a crossfire or in innocent circumstances? Now, from what I read about the advisory, it seems that the US is claiming it has some intelligence that some attacks are imminent, but it also gave kudos to the Nigerian security forces and said they are on top of the situation. You know, there are things in national security that the public is not privy to. President gets security briefings every day. So there's a lot of intelligence, internet chatter, wiretaps on phones, informants, things to where information filters through about things that are being planned in the underworld. So government is aware of many of them and they squelch many of them before they ever see the light of day. But we don't know as lay people. If we were fully aware of the security implications and how many threats that are aborted before they ever happen because government was proactive, if we were aware, we'd be truly, truly scared about. And that's a global phenomenon. It's just not in Nigeria alone. So government doesn't tell us everything about all the things it hears, it sees, it's informed about. It just goes ahead and sorts it out quietly. So US probably heard something that maybe there was a plan by Boko Haram or by terrorists. What I read was that they said in the large cities, and in Nigeria, the large cities, Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Kano, cities like that. And in the large cities, there's a threat, especially in hospitality establishments. By that, they mean hotels, eating places, shopping malls, things like that. That there's a possibility of some sort of insurgency being unleashed in these places. So as a responsible government, the US is advising its citizens, both those in the country and those outside the country planning to come to the country, that be careful. If you can avoid traveling to this place at this time, please do. That's a responsible government. Now, our government has gone back and said, look, these kind of statements are hurting are spoiling our reputation at this time when we are looking for foreign direct investment. I think President is in Saudi Arabia already or on his way to Saudi Arabia to go to an investment summit to try and attract investors. But truth be told, anywhere you look on the internet is public information. You can't hide the fact that Nigeria has an insecurity problem. Everywhere in the world it is known. They just need to Google it and they will see. They will see the attacks that happened yesterday. They'll see the attacks that happened last week. They know. So it's easy to say we want to go and attract foreign investors, right? But the foreign investors you are going to go and appeal to or you are going to go and attract, they read the papers. They read Google. They know what's happening. So more effort should be focused on combating the insurgency and foreign direct investment will come by itself. Nigeria is a very attractive country in terms of its prospects, in terms of our future, in terms of the resources we have, in terms of the human capital. We don't need to sell ourselves too much. The world already knows. We have ambassadors all out there who are making waves all across the world in every sector. The whole world knows Nigeria's potential. So we don't need to sell ourselves too much. The world will come beating a path to our door on its own if our indices are correct in this country, but if we make our environment conducive to foreigners coming, security, infrastructure, power, roads, traffic, all those things need to be already in place and sorted out. And I guarantee you, we won't need to go on any junkets to go and try to attract foreign investment. It will flow in naturally by itself. You can't ignore a market of 220 million people, especially when most of them are consumers. Most of us are open-eyed and intelligent. Most of us are enterprising. We're a lovely market. Anybody in the world wants to deal with us. But we got to get our act together in terms of our own local situation, our problems. We need to address them and get them sorted, and the world will come begging us to do business.
All right, moving on. An Abuja High Court has restated its order that directed the EFCC to release the detained governor of the central bank unconditionally. And what's your take with the situation with the former CBN governor? And of course, the court has said that okay, put him in court or put him on bail. What do you think about it? It looks too murky.
Yeah, he filed a human rights violation suit against the government. He's been in custody since June, 140 something, 149 days, which is a bit extreme. Really, according to the Constitution, the only thing that's not bailable is either murder or treason. Those are the only unbailable offenses. I don't know if he will eventually get charged with treason, but he filed a fundamental human rights violation lawsuit against the government. A court heard it, and the court said he is entitled to bail. So he got bailed out of DSS, and AFCC picked him up, and the court said, he this is fundamental human rights violation lawsuit. We've upheld it. We've given conditions for his bail. You must give him bail or present him in court to come and argue why he shouldn't be freed on bail. Well, EFCC didn't do either. They didn't give him bail. They are still holding him, and they didn't produce him in court yesterday. So the court got upset, said it's a violation of a subsisting court order, because there's a court order that says release him on bail or bring him to court. And when you bring him to court, we now make a case as to why he should not go on bail or why he should go on bail. So they didn't give him bail, and they didn't bring him to, the court had smoke coming out of his ears yesterday. He was annoyed. And he carpeted the EFCC, said you're in violation of a court order. You have no. Anyway, EFCC eventually apologized, begged for a stay of whatever. And so they've shifted the case to Wednesday, November 8th, which is tomorrow, to either do either of the two things: release him on bail by tomorrow or bring him to court. EFCC has said they'll bring him to court. And at that point, they will now discuss the issues of his entitlement to bail based on the existing court ruling. Now, let us remember that he's still an accused. He's not been convicted of anything, right? He's still alleged to have done this. Government needs to prove his case. Yes, you and me sitting here, we know how we suffered under his rule of the CBN, with Naira redenomination, with the whole round tripping of FX, all kinds of things that happened under his tenure. We, the common people, suffered. We know. But based on our suffering is not grounds enough to send him to prison or to keep him locked up. He has to go through a judicial process, be prosecuted, let a trial be heard, let the evidence be adduced, and let either a conviction or an acquittal occur. We cannot, while the case is still in limbo, begin to violate anybody's human rights, because we can look at it and say we don't like Emefiele because he made us suffer. But if government gets away with violating his fundamental human rights, none of us is safe, because they can violate anybody's fundamental human rights, whether you are guilty or not. Even the innocent can now be railroaded. You can write something innocently in the paper, they don't like it, they come and carry you. You have no bail, you are locked up, the keys thrown away, you are done. So it risks the liberty of all of us if the liberty of one, if the human rights of one is circumvented. So in this case, I stand with the court and I stand with Emefiele and say, let him have his day in court before we begin to hang him.
All right, Imo, Bayelsa, and Kogi moved to the poll this Saturday, and of course, there are fears of voter apathy, violence, and also vote buying that may occur this state during the elections and all of that. What's your take and what are your expectations? I mean, looking at what we've seen in the course of the year during our elections, what do you think? What are you seeing?
This Saturday's election coming is really worrisome, because first of all, there are flashpoints. Imo and Kogi, both those states are in a state of restiveness. Even Bayelsa is a bit quieter, but it's also a bit restive as well. And when you look at, especially in Imo, the violence that has been perpetrated recently, you look in Kogi, whereby the governor dug up a gutter to stop people from going to vote at the last presidential election, to vote for the opposition, and all kinds of shenanigans, So what the government has done is they've deployed, the IGP said he was sending like, I think 4,000 and something to Kogi and 20-something thousand to Imo police officers. The army is involved, they've militarized the election, so there's troops on ground now. That I saw a video yesterday where people came out in Kogi and were hailing the military, and were happy that they were there, because they now feel like, okay, they'll have some measure of security. Because you see, the thing about it is that if people don't feel secure and safe, they won't come out to vote. They won't. And in the presidential election that held in February, the numbers were so low in those three states. I think 13% of registered voters came out in I think it was Kogi or Imo, and another one had 20 something percent of registered voters. Very, very poor. So the pollsters are predicting even lower for this Saturday because of the political restiveness that's occurring in those two places primarily. I think Bayelsa is a bit quieter. So the people are worried that there could be outbreaks of violence, that there could be voter intimidation, especially if you are passionate or you are sympathetic towards your opposition in your state. And people know your life may be at risk, that you want to come out and cast a vote for the candidate or the party that people are opposed to could jeopardize your well-being. So people are scared. Rather than risk their lives, they will stay at home. And the unfortunate part is when there's voter apathy and you have 13% of registered voters, which may actually be 5% of the entire population of the state, what it means is that it's a minority that's dictating who leads us. It's a minority of our population. And who knows, the majority may not agree with the choice of the minority. So it really upends democracy. It turns democracy on its head, that voter apathy allows a minority to dictate who leads all of us. So we have ourselves to blame. But the security issue is paramount, and that's on government. It's not on us individually. Nobody wants to sacrifice their life just to be able to cast a vote, so we'll stay away.
All right, now let's take a look at Mr. and Mrs. before we go. And Mr. is speaking this morning. He says, will you bring this food, woman? I'm famished. And Mrs. replies, says, be patient. I'm warming the soup. Then Mr. says, for 30 minutes, even global warming does not take this long.
Mr. Global warming is centuries and centuries. What's 20 minutes for her to warm the soup? Give madam a break, I beg.
Tell you.
Mr. can be impatient sometimes. Calm down. Your soup is coming and your pounded yam is coming with it.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Daya Akintobi. Thank you for sharing your thought with us this morning.
Pleasure is all mine.
Also, remember that you can equally like, share, and subscribe on all our social media platforms showing on your screen. To find out up-to-date stories, go to our website, www.vanguardngr.com, to find out more. I am Precious Chukudi, and thank you.